Hello and welcome to today's painting demonstration. My name is Leah and I teach acrylic painting on my channel here. Today we're going into late autumn with a creek. This is a creek going through a valley, and you can tell that the grasses are starting to be beaten down back into the earth. There's not a lot of bright autumn colors in this painting, but we are gonna definitely carry a very peaceful, warm toned vibe on this one. Yellow skies, warm glowy hills, and then coming forward into some really earthy late autumn greens. If you're interested in seeing the reference for this painting, it is going to be in my art community Discord, and the links for that are in the description. So let's get started. I'm going to pick up my large filbert brush and make sure it has enough water in there. You can see that I have quite a bit of pencil and my thirds laid out on my paper. I'm using a hot press watercolor paper. It's very, very smooth, and the pencil marks that I have on here are only the ones that I want to show. I do a lot of planning when I'm developing something I'm going to paint. I look at pretty things of my own and of others for a while until I see something that interests me, and then I will restructure the entire thing, possibly change the colors, the focus, all of it. So that's when I develop my thumbnail, and then I transfer it over to my material that I'm going to be painting on. The focal point will be this interesting grove of trees. The stream will carry you into the background, and we're going very minimalistic on the sky this time. So this is burnt sienna, and I am going to start with the darkest values of my painting. I'm using a very large filbert brush. It's because it doesn't really matter. I don't want to spend too much time on the underpainting, just enough to get the values and the gist of it in. Don't need to be terribly specific. Now, when the first layer of paint is over the pencil, the graphite, it's going to be locked in. So you won't have to worry about any of that blurring or shifting after the fact. A lot of these grasses are going to be really vague, sketchy shapes, and then I want to get darker as we go into the corners. Okay, now a little bit lighter with the burnt sienna. I'm just adding water to my brush. And the brush strokes are going in the direction that if it were raining in this scene, the rain would be going down in that direction also. It is a nice, interesting, and kind of natural way to remember how you should be applying your brushwork. That's not my tip. I heard it a couple different places. I'm continuing to rinse more and more burnt sienna out of my paintbrush. And that is okay, since we are working on paper, the paint is soaking in. You don't have to worry about the immense amount of water ruining the binder of the acrylic paint. It's totally okay. We can just keep on layering up, and since this is a paper painting, it will be framed in its final display. And that all works out great. Gonna lighten that up a little bit. If you're fast, you can wipe off some of the paint you put down. This is watercolor paper, and then, okay, the final area, the lightest value, is really, it's really in the creek, but the sky is this warm, buttery yellow. I'm gonna let that get a little bit darker into the corner. And I'm gonna put that color in the water as well, and I'm using horizontal brush strokes. Maybe a little touch of yellow right over here. Okay, I am liking that. I'm gonna put away my big filbert brush. We are no longer in need of that anymore. And I think I have a puddle right here. It's gonna take a second to dry, but I can mix my paint colors while I'm waiting for this to happen. So the sky is going to be this buttery yellow, and then there's going to be a lot of warm tones coming forward. And these trees you would think would be green, but we're really going to be mixing an army green, like an ochre green. I'm going to do that using just these paints. So I'm going to start with burnt sienna. I'm going to mix some ultramarine blue on the side. That's going to give us our absolute darkest value. Then I'll put a little bit more sienna on the side of that, and then I'm going to add some cadmium yellow light. And then some cerulean blue. Cadmium yellow is going to give us more of a green, a medium green, but I do have a lot of burnt sienna on my palette knife, and that's fine because I want to mute it down a bit. It's more of a khaki green. And we might have some bright spots of grass, but not too much. And I will just touch that with yellow if I feel like I want that to happen. So now with this army green, I'm gonna try to transition it up to a muted, almost mauve is what it looks like in the photo, but I might change that a bit. So I'm going to make an orange, this nice medium orange right here. Right off the side of our green, I'll make a half and half color of the green and the orange right between those two paint piles. And there is our green transitioning to that warm, warm color. Trying to decide if that's right or not. I think that's right. I'm sensing just a touch of magenta. I just don't want it to get too muted. Let's see. It's okay, I can always add more yellow. Well, that definitely makes it mauve. Now a touch of titanium white. Here I was thinking I was going to give myself an easier painting today, but the colors are a little bit trickier than usual. Okay, there's our mauve to green. I'm happier with the mauve than I was with the orange. If I'm going to use an orange at all, I'm going to use burnt sienna for like some end of season grass clumps. Okay, Okay, I think we're gonna call that good. See, now you mix all your colors first, and then when you go back, everything's pretty much dry. And I'm gonna grab my small filbert brush, this one. We're gonna mix a sky color. I'm gonna pick up just a touch of burnt sienna, some cadmium yellow, titanium white. Just a touch more burnt sienna. Get that nice warm color there. It's a little warmer than butter, but still looks delicious. Kind of looks like maybe macaroni and cheese color yellow. Well, it depends on which box of macaroni and cheese you are eating. Not the one with artificial colors would be this color. Okay, now I'm adding titanium white to the side. And this lighter color is going to be what's found on the horizon, and the darker color is going to be on this far corner. So I'm going to take that lighter color, I'm going to brush it right up to where the horizon line is planned to be. Make it a little bit lighter coming into this treetop because this is our focal point and I want dramatic contrast here. All right, continuing on our horizon line. Now the darker color is going to go in the corner. Pretty much just an inch from the corner, and then I'm going to mix into that lighter color and blend that all in. I'm using very small, pouncy brush strokes. Like an overcast type day. Now this is pretty much, well, it's about half dry, but I'm going to add another layer of white towards that focal point. It's not totally dry, but it is dry enough to add another layer of paint on top. And that is looking pretty good. Now I'm going to move on to the next layer, but I'm going to be changing the paintbrush to the 1/4 inch flat. Alright, so the 1/4 inch flat that I'm using today has pretty long bristles. I prefer it like that. It gives the brush a nice amount of bounce and some maneuverability to it. So I've got some water in there, and I'm going to go to that mauve color. Now we're starting with some really distant mountains. And I'm thinking that I'm going to take that mauve that we mixed way over on the side here, and I'm going to add it to the sky color that's remaining. Maybe even a touch more white. And it's ending up being more than just a touch more white, but now we have enough. And I believe that's the color I want. I'm going to start with the distant mountain on the left side. And I'm using the flat brush in a way where I'm using the skinny end and I'm pulling and pushing up into the sky to give myself little tiny, very distant evergreen tree shapes. As I come close to that tree, I'm just adding a little bit more white. I'm mixing it right on the painting, which is bold and risky, so you can or do that if you want, but if not, I understand if you just mix it right here on the corner of your blob of mauve. As I'm coming down to the bottom of that plane, I'm lightening it up just a touch. Short pouncy brush strokes. Okay, great. That's it for that side. Now in between these little tree branches, I'm going to take that same color mauve and just dab it in there. I can always come back and adjust these negative shapes later, not a big deal. Adjusting that mauve with yet again more white. I am grabbing that there, and I'm going to continue the right side of the distant trees, the range back there. It's almost like a sawing motion that I'm using. All right, now that I have the top of that range, that layer, I'm going to lighten it up just a bit, blend that in as I'm coming down. This is going to give us a little bit more contrast in between the layers of trees, but also it is showing some mist, some atmosphere. It's helping with depth. This is late autumn scene, so there's a lot of moisture evaporating off the ground, I would imagine. Okay, that layer looks good. Now, remember the mauve that we didn't pull over to add mountains of white. That's going to be the next layer. Now these trees are going to be a bit bigger, so my handling of them is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to take the very smallest end of this flat brush and kind of sketch out some little bit more detail, while also using similar brush strokes as before, the sawing motion. Similar motion, just on bigger shapes, creating bigger shapes. Bigger evergreen shaped trees. They can be vague still. It is preferred that there's lots of variation. And also, I can always come back and add negative shapes. Need a little bit of water on my brush there for bristle control. If you feel like the paint is bullying your brush, you might need to add a little bit of water. All right, coming down to the focal point, I am going to lighten that up a bit. I'm going to go back up to this lighter mauve and blend that in to the bottom of this current layer of trees that we're working on. It's just that last third that comes up against our focal point trees. I think we're going to keep on working from back to front. So the next layer that I'm going to be painting is going to be the trees in front of that. These are the focal point trees, and this last touch of range is only a little bit behind them, not enough, far enough behind to have a shift in value. So I'm going to go down to this darkest value. I'm going to put it on the side of that olive green. I want it to be just a little bit greener than the green, than the dark, and a little bit darker than the green. So we need the halfer. That's looking pretty good. Still using the flat brush here, and now using the skinny side of the brush, I'm going to use the smallest corner. If you don't feel comfortable doing this, you can switch to a point brush or a script brush. A liner, if you will, the really skinny ones. If you didn't like your tree shapes, you could always add negative shapes as well, just to add more interest. If they're too thick and bulky, that would be the time to do that as well. You can see how skinny of a line I can still get with a 1/4 inch flat. And just make sure to sharpen it up in your palette when you're adding paint. All right, there we go. Bringing a little bit of mauve to the trees that are closest to our major outcropping, just to lighten it up a bit, blended it into the background. I accidentally made a weird shape, so I just put another tree there. No big deal. It's part of the freedom of painting a natural scene. You can always add or subtract trees, that's fine. Clouds, same thing. There's a lot of freedom. In these vague, loose landscapes. Okay, darkening that color up just a little bit. Now this line of trees goes all the way up to the top of the painting. Okay, that's looking good. I think I'm gonna leave that guy until after we get this ground color on. So now we're gonna work on that mauve color. Go ahead and give your flat brush a good rinse out. The mauve is gonna get a little bit greener. So if you made a gradient similar to mine, you're gonna be able to move pretty seamlessly here. I think I have some trees sketched out here into the background. It's gonna look more like bushes though, since I have just this color. That's fine, as long as there isn't a straight line that runs off your composition. I'm darkening it up a bit at the bottom of those trees. I don't want there to be a hard line. Also, this is such an overcast day, there isn't a very specific shadow pattern that I'm picking up, really at all. Now I put down some green mauve right here and I lightened it up a bit, but I'm not happy with that hard line, so I'm just picking up some water, rinsing out my brush, and dragging that in a bit. Just want that to be a softer transition. There we go. Now I'm going to want to vary these colors as I'm moving across the terrain. So here I put down a stroke of that olive green, and then I'm going to want to go a little bit more muted as I go up towards that tree line. Using the side of my flat brush now. Anything that looks like a weird blend, you can just go over it again. Try out some different brush strokes since we're working with a lot of different layers. And they're very thin paint layers. Since you don't have to deal with a thick texture that you just put down, you can just keep on adding thin layers to get something that you like. So don't be afraid. It dries very quickly. You can move on and try new things when it is dry. And if it's not dry, if you are fast enough, you can add some water and try to pick that up. So now I'm moving closer into the foreground, and as I get closer into the foreground, I'm going to go a little bit darker with these earthy tones. and alternating between more brown type colors and then a little bit more green. There's still the water to address too, that's a whole nother thing. When you use the side of your flat on a smooth surface, you're going to get a lot of these really natural looking shapes, and that's because the surface is smooth. You're not getting a lot of that canvas bump. Okay, so now I think what I'll do is I'll doll up that little tree. With a very, very dark green, so I'm going to take that darkest value we mixed earlier with the half burnt sienna and half ultramarine blue, and I'm going to pull it over to that olive green again, get something real dark. Has to be at least as dark as those focal point trees. Sharp edge of the paintbrush, and don't go all the way up to the tree line, just below it. You don't want to make a conflict of edges or shapes. Just wouldn't read quite right. Do a nice interesting little tree shape, which is to say try to make the tree not symmetrical. Okay, now using that same value, I'm going to put a little bit of ground clutter on that same plane. And then a little bit in front of it. Now I have that earthy green brown in my brush. I'm going to sketch some little grasses and shrubs. These shapes are getting bigger as we move towards the viewer in the foreground. Now I'm picking up that army green. I'm going to smear it around that creek edge, making sure to add enough water. That transparency is going to do nothing but help us out, actually. See, I think I'm going to save that darker green color for the foreground grasses. And now I'm going to incorporate just a little bit of that mauve color into the foreground. And knock down any of those really, really bright colors, those little bright tones coming through some of those grasses. I don't want those to pull too hard. When I say pull, I mean pull your eye's attention towards them. I want to go up this creek with my eye and then up those little trees there and into that distant horizon, that yummy warm butternut soup color. I do like these little sparklies that are happening in between those trees. I think that's worth a look at. But your eye does go there. You go back and then up and out. So that is pretty successful. Now, the reflection in the stream is what we're going to be handling next, and it's a peculiar color in this reference photo as I'm studying it. I'm going to take titanium white, just a touch of that mauve, and then a touch of the cadmium yellow light. A little bit more mauve, a little bit more yellow. Am I getting what I need here? Just a touch more. A touch is my official measurement system. Keep on going until you get something similar to your sky. Your sky might look a little different than my sky, and that's okay. Every painting, whether you like it or not, is a step in your journey, your painting journey. I think that's going to do it. Okay, now take your flat brush, which we've been using for the majority of this painting, and you're going to be making sharp edge horizontal brush strokes where you have your little stream planned out, just back and forth, zig and zag that thing all the way into the foreground. Now you don't have to have exact precision with your edges here. And you don't need to have exact precision with your coverage either. Just make sure all your pencil lines are obscured. You can always add another layer. If you overlap your stream edge, that is totally okay. Now I'm going to take titanium white and I'm just going to put a couple here and there, horizontal brush strokes, put down the same way you just did all of the rest of the stream, but towards the middle, just to give it a little bit of highlight. Less as you go back into the distance, and just a touch on that last pass before it disappears behind that burn. Okay, so shocker, I'm going to use the same paintbrush for the last touches that are going to be the foreground grasses. I'm just going to make sure you get a really good rinse on that brush. That's looking good. Okay, so pick up a color that's dark and earthy. It could be a little bit greener or a little bit browner, that's fine. I'm going to use the sharp edge and just do some vague foreground grass shapes. You can carry them into the distance a bit, just make sure they get a little bit smaller. All right, I'm darkening those corners. Okay, just take a moment to notice. Let your eye take the journey on your painting into the focal point, hopefully, definitely into the background. That would be also successful. If you want to paint any negative shapes into your trees, this would be the time to do that. And if you want to correct any values, this would also be the time to do that. Now, if you want to just change something a little bit, you can take a good amount of water into your paint and knock down a value just a hair. Just make sure if you are adding negative shapes to trees, you got to make sure to kind of nail the color. It could be a little bit different because it's not connected, but it should be similar enough to not be distracting. Okay, now I'm going to add a couple negative shapes here on this row. I'm going to bring back some of these darker, distant ground shapes. Okay, I'm going to call it. That ended up being very warm dominant. This is a very warm dominant painting, and the parts that even get slightly cool, I would still call them very warm. Those are very warm greens, so not a lot of cool at all. In fact, it's interesting what color relativity will do. The white, just straight white, that is in the highlights on the water look cool just relative to everything else that's happening there. But I think this was fun. I think it was interesting. It's successful. It takes you all the way back to the focal point and then beyond. So I hope you had fun with this painting. And I will see you again next Wednesday for hopefully another scenic, seasonal landscape painting. Thank you so much. And until next time, happy painting.